The first Resident Evil arrived in 1998 on the PlayStation 1, and it was a revolution for video games that brought genuine fear and terror to a lot of its players for the first time. It was also the first ever mainstream game to coin the term survival horror, due to its emphasis on scarce resources, claustrophobic environments, fixed camera angles, and horrific imagery. It was a term that has since stuck within the industry and spawned many more games like it across several generations of consoles and PCs. Years later, Resident Evil 4 would take the series into a much more action-focused direction, including a new over-the-shoulder perspective to allow for more accurate aiming, cinematic QuickTime events, and a higher amount of resources and weapons available for the player to collect and use. Resident Evil 5 introduced us to cooperative survival horror, and Resident Evil 6 ramped up the action even further by giving us 4 different campaigns to choose from, all with massive and bombastic set pieces and plenty of health and ammunition to go around. Now, on the franchise's 20th anniversary, Capcom director Koichi Nakanishi has taken the franchise back to its survival horror roots instead of opting for something along the same lines as Resident Evil 6, or even, heaven forbid, the god-awful team-based shooter Umbrella Corps. Resident Evil 7 Biohazard is not only a game that's drastically different in style and vision to any other entry in the main series, but is also hands down one of the best Resident Evil games ever made. It's clear that the success of games like Amnesia, The Dark Descent, Outlast, and Hideo Kojima's PT demo have had a heavy influence on the final product, as well as classic Western horror movies like The Texas Chainsaw Massacre, The Blair Witch Project, and even to a certain extent the Saw series. A more cynical mind could look at this and say that Capcom is simply copying these games and branding the Resident Evil name all over it to capitalize on the hype generated by the cancelled Silent Hills. However, there are more than enough elements within Resident Evil 7 that combine to make something truly unique and special, while at the same time still leaving it recognizable as a Resident Evil game. This shift in direction for the series is certainly a bold move from Capcom that could have easily backfired on them had they not handled it properly, but thankfully this is just the thing that Resident Evil needed to revitalize itself and remind everyone that it's still got what it takes to be truly scary. Gone are the huge set pieces, third-person camera, and ridiculous bioweapons, and instead we get a first-person perspective with a far more scaled-down and intimate experience that focuses much more on using real-world fears and building up subtle tension and atmosphere to scare its players. While I won't spoil anything, I will say that when set pieces do occur, they're handled so excellently you'll likely never see them coming, and can often happen in places where you'd least expect it, throwing you instantly off guard. There are also no global pharmaceutical companies developing secret bioweapons, and you also won't be playing as a well-known character like Leon Kennedy or Chris Redfield. Instead, players are put into the shoes of Ethan Winters, a completely new character who's just a normal guy searching for a wife he'd presumed had been dead for 3 years until a mysterious message prompts him to go looking for her in Louisiana. This is a much more personal journey, and it does an excellent job of getting the player invested in the story and the characters surrounding them. The fact that Ethan is just an average guy in a really messed up situation also puts the player in his shoes perfectly, making all the horror surrounding Ethan and happening to him much more frightening and believable. However, all of this pales in comparison to perhaps some of the most memorable villains in Resident Evil's entire history since Albert Wesker. The Bakers. The Baker family are perhaps the most frightening thing to happen to Resident Evil in a very long time, and are easily the best thing about this game. There's just something about being at the mercy of a family of cannibalistic hillbillies that's really unsettling, and the fact that these were one time a normal family makes them truly horrifying. Villains before in Resident Evil games have always been scientists for some grand company, or a monster that was a result of some secret government project. So to have these characters that are way more grounded in our reality than anything else in the series before it was a genius move that paid off in spades. The voice actors also deserve special praise for not only managing to embody their roles perfectly, but also for not having it up with goofy one-liners and corny over-the-top accents. It's not just the Bakers that will be a threat to you either, as players will have to fend off new enemies called the Molded. These creatures can come at you from practically anywhere and gang up on you fast unless you take them out quickly or are lucky enough to escape from them. Their design is a little goofy looking at times, and most of the time you can just shut the door on them and they won't follow you, but overall they still look menacing enough to be considered scary and not take you out of the experience, and that's part of what makes this game so great. Everything on the screen, from the sound design to the visual effects, all do an amazing job of creating this feeling of unease and vulnerability, almost like the player is being watched by someone or something, even if there are no enemies on screen. You genuinely dread rounding every corner, not knowing what could be lurking behind it, and as you anxiously skulk around each dilapidated and decaying corridor, the game's atmosphere really permeates through to your very core and instills a fear that stays right with you up until the very end of the game. Of course, all the level design in the world would be meaningless if there wasn't a good reason to want to explore it, yet. And thankfully, Capcom has crafted a location that manages to be as iconic and as memorable as the original Spencer Mansion, and well designed to a point where any instances where you're required to backtrack almost go completely unnoticed. None of the rooms feel like a waste of space or filler, and each one is packed full of secrets for the players to uncover. There are also hidden videotapes to watch that flesh out the story even further than the main narrative, and are essential for those who want to know the bigger picture. There is also significantly less emphasis on combat in this game, especially when compared to Resident Evil 6, bringing back that feeling of powerlessness and vulnerability that the series have been lacking for many years. You'll find a few weapons to collect and ammo hidden around for you to use with them, and you can now even craft bullets by combining gunpowder with items called chem fluids, but you'll never really feel like you're overpowered to a point where the game is too easy, especially on the game's brutal Madhouse difficulty setting. The controls of the game also feel easy enough to pick up and master. There weren't really any times where I felt confused as to what button to use for what, especially when in a panic and under pressure, which is very good for a horror game like this. Despite being in truly deplorable environments, this is a gorgeous looking game to behold when running on high graphical settings. Every spatter of blood, disgusting fridge full of juicy innards all looks really convincing, and even with a lot happening on screen, the game managed to run at a steady 1080p 60 FPS on a GTX 970, even despite a couple of technical issues getting in the way. PC owners will no doubt have noticed an issue with the game constantly freezing up when loading into new areas shortly after leaving the Baker family table, and after doing some research online, it looks to be a problem with the way the game handles system memory being the cause of it. Hopefully Capcom will be able to patch this out in the coming months, if not already, but for now, unless you have a graphics card with more than 4GB VRAM, stick to the settings listed below in the description. The only complaint with the game itself is a certain section towards the end of the campaign where the game almost starts to feel a bit tedious, but thankfully it doesn't last long enough to outstay its welcome and won't ruin the overall experience. I won't say anything to risk spoiling for new players, but anyone who's already played it will certainly know exactly what section I'm talking about. Additionally, the puzzles in this game are arguably too easy, especially when compared to other games in the series. However, this was likely an intentional design choice that was made in order to preserve the game's excellent pacing and not ruin it as a result.
Go tell Aunt Rhodey. Go tell Aunt Rhodey that everybody's. Go tell Aunt Rhodey. Go tell Aunt Rhodey. Go tell Aunt Rhodey. It's okay. It's okay, it's me.
From its surprise, shock and awe announcement at E3 2016 that dropped an immediately playable demo the same day, to its superb marketing campaign that's kept everyone hooked for a whole year, Resident Evil 7 was riding a hype wave so high that it easily could have crashed and burned had it not met expectations. But thankfully, Capcom's decision to let Koichi Nakanishi's team take the series 2 steps back to its roots was the biggest step forward in the right direction that they've made in a very long time, and with future DLC expansions planned, we can't wait to see how they continue this. Welcome to the family, Resident Evil. We've missed you.